My wife gets served to appear at her boss's divorce. I, 30 male, and my wife Claire, 30 female, met almost 10 years ago in college. To the best of my knowledge, we were happily married and had a healthy personal life together. We were both working in our respective fields and had our first baby on the way. It's amazing how much your life can change in just a few short weeks. It was supposed to be a night of celebration for me. It was my 30th birthday, and we were going out to dinner. My wife was stunning that night. She was almost glowing in her dress, her baby bump just beginning to show. I'd been so excited about becoming a father, already making plans for the nursery and picking out names. I'd even convinced myself that this dinner was a sign of a new chapter for us, putting aside the stress of her job and focusing on our family. Claire wanted to resign from her job to take on the role of a full-time mom. I was supportive of that since we both made enough money individually and didn't need one of us to work. Since finding out she was pregnant, she'd changed so much. She spent hours a day focused on the pregnancy and planning everything. Whenever we were together, she was excited and constantly talked about how much she wanted to be a mom. We had picked out the nicest restaurant in town, one we hadn't been to in years. I had planned the whole night to be special, a reminder of the good times we'd always shared. For the last couple of days, Claire seemed anxious. In hindsight, it all makes sense now. At the time, I thought it was just the hormones and the stress of her pregnancy. Her boss had been running her ragged the last few months, calling her in at odd hours and keeping her late. Like an idiot, I never questioned it because I trusted her. She was my wife, and I loved her. We had just started on appetizers when a man approached our table. He was wearing a suit and held a thick manila envelope in his hands. He walked right up to the table, looking at my wife. I glanced at Claire, confused. She stiffened, her eyes locked on the envelope like it was a bomb. The man asked my wife if she was Claire Adams, his voice flat but professional. She hesitated and then replied that she was, her voice barely audible. I could see the dread on her face. No shock, just that resigned sort of look on her face. I was sitting there kind of confused, wondering what was going on. He placed the envelope on the table in front of her. "You've been served. You are required to appear as a witness in the divorce trial of John and Emily Saunders." He turned and walked away without another word. I stared at the envelope, then at Claire. My mind spun, trying to grasp what was happening. I expected her to laugh it off as a ridiculous mistake. But she just sat there, staring at the papers with wide eyes and trembling hands. I asked her what this was all about. It's funny in a way. As soon as he walked away and my mind processed what he had said, it was like all the puzzle pieces fit together. I told her to open the envelope to see what it was all about. She had this sick look but started tearing open the envelope with a jerky motion. After glancing at the documents, her face went pale. She looked at me and said her boss's wife had made accusations about many women in the office, and apparently, she was blaming Claire too. I asked her what the accusations were about, and she said that Emily thought he was sleeping around. By now, my heart was pounding. You work for the guy, that's it. What could she possibly be talking about? She shook her head, not meeting my eyes. I don't know. It's some misunderstanding. Probably because of the long hours. I wanted to believe her. I really did. She was pregnant with our child. We were building a life and preparing for our baby. I guess in hindsight, being human, my brain kept going back to all those late hours and weekend work days. As we left the restaurant, her silence spoke louder than any words could. In the car ride home, I kept glancing at her, waiting for some kind of explanation, some kind of reassurance. But she just stared out the window. Weeks passed, and she brushed me off every time I brought up the court case. It's just a formality, or it doesn't concern me. But I couldn't shake the growing sense of dread. I have to admit that the more she avoided talking about it, the more my suspicion grew. I was at a point where I needed answers, and I couldn't wait for her to give them to me. In a decision that changed my life, I decided to go to the trial myself. Claire had made it abundantly clear that she wanted to handle this herself. The more she pushed back on me going, the more it became imperative that I needed to be there. That morning, I took a half-day off work, drove to the courthouse, and slipped inside. I had this thought that I'd sneak in and hide in the corner among the other people in the courtroom. To my surprise, the courtroom only had a few people in it and everyone turned to look at me when I walked in. This included Claire. The look of shock on her face spoke volumes. My heart was hammering in my chest as I sat down and waited. Interestingly enough, the case developed way faster than I thought. There had obviously been a lot going on between the opposing parties outside of the court. The sticking point of the case was the infidelity clause that was being pushed by the wife. The wife of Claire's boss was asked questions by the judge, and evidence was provided by her lawyer. Without doing a play-by-play, the wife had hired a company to gather evidence, and it implicated 3 women. It seems that Claire was the only one from her office. The other 2 women seemed to be part of a social circle that the boss and his wife were part of. Pictures and a video were presented to the judge that showed some graphic details of his affairs. All 3 of the women, one of whom was my wife, were questioned about their relationships with her AP. Those supporting pictures and videos were shown to the witnesses, and they were asked to detail the extent of their relationships with AP. There was a lot of crying. The entire time Claire answered questions, she looked at me, tears running down her cheeks. My heart felt like it stopped. There were questions about them going to a hotel with a bunch of specific times and dates. This was a gut punch for me, especially when the judge was asking her if she was the person in the pictures and she said yes to each. The final blow came with the video played on a screen that only she and the judge could see. She broke down as soon as she saw what it was and refused to watch the whole thing, telling the judge that she was the person in the video with AP. The judge's voice cut through the fog in my mind. "Mrs. Adams, is this you in these photographs and video?" Claire hesitated, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Yes," sobbed. "It's me." That was it. My world collapsed in that instant. Everything I thought we had, everything we were building. She had lied to me, to us, to our future. I felt bile rise in my throat, my hands gripping the bench in front of me so hard my knuckles were white. The betrayal felt like someone slapped me in the face. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. She turned, and her eyes found mine. Her face was twisted in horror, screaming my name, her voice breaking, begging me to let her explain. I stood up, my legs shaky from what I thought was pure adrenaline pumping through my system. I couldn't listen to it anymore, so I turned and walked out. It was so quiet that I could hear my steps echoing in the courtroom silence. I remember hearing her sobbing and calling after me, but I didn't stop. I pushed through the doors, into the hallway, and into the fresh cold air outside the courthouse. For weeks, I avoided her staying with friends and family. I needed space to think, to process the betrayal. She begged me to talk, to listen to her side, but I couldn't stand to be near her. I don't know why it took so long, but one day, I woke up in a cold sweat thinking about the baby. This affair started before my wife got pregnant. I didn't know what to believe anymore. My mind was racing thinking, was it mine? Or was this another lie? I called Claire and demanded a prenatal DNA test as soon as she answered the phone. She initially resisted but eventually agreed when I told her I would consider staying if the baby was mine. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The results came back weeks later. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the sealed envelope. My hands shook as I tore it open. The words jumped out at me like a death sentence. The probability of paternity is 0%. I felt the world go silent. There it was, in black and white. The baby wasn't mine. This child, the one I had been dreaming about and planning for, wasn't even mine. I'd been living in a nightmare I hadn't wanted to see. I got into my car and drove to my house. I walked in and went upstairs to find my wife sitting on the bed, her eyes red and swollen. She looked up at me, hope flickering in her gaze. I tossed the paper onto the bed. "It's not mine," I said, shocked at my own lack of emotion. I watched as she crumpled, burying her face in her hands. Claire pleaded with me, saying she was sorry and reaching out to me. I took a step back and shook my head. "No, Claire. It's too late. You lied to me, you betrayed me, and now, you want me to forgive you and raise another man's baby." She continued to cry, pleading, but I turned away. "I'm divorcing you," I said, the words heavy with finality. I simply told her, I can't live with this anymore. I walked out of the room and went downstairs, my heart feeling like it was shattered. I knew there was no other choice. She had destroyed everything, the love, the trust, and the family we were supposed to be. As I stepped outside, I let myself break down for the first time in weeks. I cried like never before as I stood there, feeling utterly alone, devastated by the reality that my wife had killed my dreams of being a husband and father. I think I'll end this here. There's no real reason to go through the divorce. It was pretty simple after AP's wife contacted me through her lawyer to offer up the video evidence she used against her husband. Claire tried to fight the divorce but was denied. I essentially walked away from the last 10 years of my life. I've moved on but Claire hasn't. She's a single mom still living in the house we purchased years ago. I had opted for more cash from our savings so she could raise the baby in a stable home. Don't worry, AP got his in the end. Not that I'm going to talk about it in detail. Let's just say that he spent some quality time in the hospital a few months later.